So hi everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Supply Chain Talk. My name is Duncan Brock, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to host today's discussion. Every episode on Supply Chain Talk is covering different aspects of supply chain challenges, issues, focus areas, and we've covered a broad range since we sort of kicked this off back in September last year. And today is going to be no different. Last week, I think, was hosted by one of my colleagues, Laura, and they focused on end-to-end demand planning, which was a very interesting discussion around that. Whereas this week, we're focusing on a very broad topic of the decentralization of distribution and manufacturing. So whether or not there are ways in which organizations should be looking at how they really re-engineer their supply chains as they go forward. So going to be really interesting discussion around that. I've got three sort of guests that's going to join me, an international guest group as usual, which is great. And they've got some real expertise to share on supply chain and planning and looking at the future of what these supply chains should be as we go forward, both with the European slant and with the US slant. So I think that's going to be a very interesting dynamic as we go forward. Those of you who are joining us live, delighted that you can join us today. That's great. And please do engage. I see already there's a number of you in the chat adding in welcomes from where you are and who you are and where you've come from. So great to see someone, Thomas from Ghana and John from London. James, nice to be back with you, and Benjamin and Mark. Great to see you all, and thank you for joining us on the Supply Chain Talk. So please use the chat to engage and to talk to each other. Also, there's a Q&A button. So if you've got any specific questions for any of us as we go forward, please log them in the Q&A, and I'll try and make sure during the session that we've got time to answer those questions or as many as we can through the discussion that goes on today. So please engage as you can. There's a little incentive for engagement. We have a little mug, a Supply Chain Talk mug, which is a rare beast that we hand out or give out at the end of the session to that best person who's joined us on chat or the best question that's come across. So if you want a little bit of incentive, there's a Supply Chain Talk mug that you can win at the end, and I'll be selecting who that person was. So that's the session for today. I said great that you can join us, and delighted that you're engaging with us in the way that you are. I'd like to bring in my first guest. The first guest is Patrick Hicks, who's the Managing Partner and Global Head of Supply Chain Solutions at BCI Global. So welcome to you, Patrick. Thank you for joining me today. It's great to have you here.
Hey, thank you so much, Duncan, and also glad to be on the show, and looking forward to the discussion of this very timely topic of decentralization of production and distribution, and tying that into how companies can respond to the disruptions that we're all facing today.
That's great, thank you. And the way that we run Supply Chain Talk is we really try and do it at two halves. One is very much looking at a topical news story, and then we'll get into some more specific discussions around the topic that's on the table here about the focus of decentralization, distribution, and manufacturing. So maybe let's bring the news article to life first, because that's probably a good way of starting the discussion. And it's one that was published sort of a couple of weeks ago now in sort of Cycling Industry News. And this is around Bike, who are deciding to invest in a new manufacturing facility in Lithuania. So it's a Netherlands-based company looking for additional production facility, the ability for 600,000 new bikes that they're wanting to build in this new facility, and choosing Lithuania. And I think that's a really interesting aspect of that, sort of looking for the right manufacturing base as you go forward. And they were looking for European production. They claimed that it was, that Lithuania had stability, political stability. There was ease of doing business there. There was a skilled workforce. Really good assets there. Excellent logistics, which I suppose for anyone who's going to be making things like bikes and shipping them around the world is going to be important. But also clearly some tax incentives that they're able to tap into. But that sort of move to build that facility in Lithuania, I think, is really interesting. So I think probably, Patrick, it'd be good to get your insight. I know you want to share some insights as well from the BCI global perspective of some of the changes that's going on, and then we'll come back and talk specifically about that news article.
Yeah, and I think it's especially interesting because there's a lot of talks about decentralization and reshoring and nearshoring, and it's not new. The topic has been around for a decade, right? You even saw that with the U.S.-China trade war when Mr. Trump was, in the White House. So you saw a surge picking up, but you don't see that much, in the news of companies that are really kind of have made radical shifts. So it's a nice example in the bicycle industry, driven by the demand in bicycles, but also because of anti-dumping, anti kind of trade barriers driving certain things to move. So it's a nice example. I was mentioning earlier in our call that Intel even made an announcement to invest 20 billion in the US for a new chips plant. So there's some development going, but not everybody is making the news, because if you have a manufacturing plant, for instance, in Mexico, and you upscale or you put different production lines to the mix, it doesn't read like, hey, there's a big driving force behind this. But I think we are really at a crossroad where companies, given the whole aftermath of COVID, or even in the midst of the aftermath, really need to look into the ways how they set up their global supply chains. And by means of introduction, so I'm leading the global supply chain practice of BSHAC Global. I'm not going to do a promo here, but our company really has a passion to look into the global footprint. So from a source, from a make and a deliver point of view of companies in their footprint strategy, but also in making it happen in reality. So there's a little bit of my personal background and our passion of our company. And what I would like to start off with, this is only one example of the bicycle industry, but if we look into, where we are today, in terms of, if we had to take a step back, we're still in the midst of this perfect storm, right? Yes, we have geopolitical risks, we have geopolitical tensions that are still out there. When you look into Russia and the Ukraine, whether it's the US and China, still, very sensitive topic. So that also means a lot of our clients, and I think a lot of people in the room, are asking the question about, are our supply chains really fit for purpose, or do we need to shift gears, and what kind of impact does it have on our footprint, and are we not too reliant on one country or the other? So that's really kind of driving one element of the discussion. Of course, we still have the perfect storm with COVID and everything that goes with that, but also when you tie it in with the shortages, right? So everybody. I think you also had some episodes on the shortage of raw materials and commodities. I think that's will ease out hopefully this year. But then if you take it into consideration of the labor market, then the ways that we see that the economic surge in demand has caused large labor shortages, not only in the US or in the UK, but also in Europe. That puts things in a totally different perspective. And then even you have the logistics capacity, when we all see the vessels docking in Long Beach or in Felixstowe or in the ports in Europe. The capacity is one element. The unreliability is a key one, because how can you plan if you have a long global complex supply chains? If you need to add a month, but you don't know if the month is going to be real or not. So how are you basically going to steer and make sure you have enough inventory to kind of cater for your sales? So we're still in the midst of the perfect storm. I'm not expecting that to be over soon. So that all boils down to the fact that companies will face disruptions going forward, and that means we need to kind of be ready and to look into our footprint. And I'm asking Dan, if you can put up the slide, that would be, I think, for the audience perhaps good to kind of navigate here. But it's an important element. So when I talk to senior leaders, and I'm guessing here that many of you in the audience will be asked by senior leaders to the question like, hey, is our footprint fit for purpose? Do we need to change? Is it only on the distribution side? Is it only on the manufacturing side? So what are the real dynamics going forward? And if you then hone into, and as this recent survey we did as BSHAC Global, we interviewed over the last 3 months, 122 executives across different geographies, across different industries, and 60%, so 60 of the audience was indicating that they were planning to shift their production from typically the Far East into Europe or the US. So that's a big number, especially if you take into consideration that the remainder 40% is a big portion, even that people that don't know what they're going to do, right? So it's a big I would say it's a large number. So that also kind of shows that this is a hot topic. But it's not so easy to implement, right? That's why, the nice case about Poln is like a company that's done it, but, making the change is a huge one. The other interesting fact, and people can text me for more info on that, is, if companies are going to do the reshoring or nearshoring, it's also about, what are you going to do from a manufacturing technology point of view? Because if you are in a low labor cost country, that's great. But if you then reshore, how do you deal with the labor if there are no workers around, right? So the automation and the shift for more, automated factories is a key element that basically coincides with the large number of companies kind of, moving towards the potential reshoring aspect. And I think important for the audience here, I'm very open to have, further questions there, is, it's not like this is a silver bullet for everybody, right? It's a solution for everyone. So even I see in our clientele companies doing part of the solution, moving to the Mexico for the US, or even Eastern Europe for Europe. So it's also kind of, where is the sweet spot for this? But in my view is, companies need to kind of follow, like, I would call it a DE strategy or a DE policy. It is about decoupling continental flows. It's de-risking, which is quite obvious. It's let's say, have another look at the sourcing side. So if you're single sourced, consider that. Although it's easier said than done. If you're very small and have a high mix, low volume manufacturing or product mix, it's not so easy to shift away from a single sourcing strategy. But it's really about decentralization, production, and distribution, on top of the whole let's say, carbonization. So take into consideration the carbon impact companies have, and that's really, I would say, over the last few years, really kind of providing even more dynamic in the whole conversation. So one of our clients is looking into, if we procure steel, you have the difference between the global commodity market between, green steel versus non-green steel, right? So that dynamic even kind of kicks in here as well. So if you look into challenges that people need to ask themselves, or questions that people need to ask themselves, or the leaders, is, are we going to go global, or going to go regional? And what is the sweet spot? And is this relocation? Is this automation? How do you deal with economies of scale? And if you talk about operating effectiveness of a plant or yield management, how do you make sure that if you move from one global focus factory to a more dispersed setup, how are you going to make the economics work? And what does that then mean for your total landed cost? It might well be that your landed costs go up, but how do you balance that with the insurance policy of mitigating and dealing with risks? So a lot of questions people need to ask themselves, or leadership has put on the agenda, that companies need to think about. And that's where everybody would see the upsides of, I would say, the decentralization in terms of reducing the risk. So if you talk about supply risk, if you talk about trade barrier risk, and all of the risks that you can quantify, the upside is definitely there. You can even market this with the government push, or some of the government incentives, but also with the made in the US, or even the made in Germany brand. So even can uplift your margin potentially. But there's a lot of buts there, right? Because if it was so easy, then a lot of companies would have done it. And I think if you look into the key kind of drivers or barriers why this is not a common ground for everybody, or it's just a walk in the park. It's really linked to, beyond the financials, it's linked to the labor and finding the right people in your organization that have the capability to do technology transfers, to find the right skilled workforce in terms of the industrial engineers, but also the workers across the let's say the Western Hemisphere, to deal with a supply base there. So you talk about the time it takes for making the basically doing your homework, making the decision and implementation, that could last even 2 to 3 years before you can do a ramp up. And that's why you also see, although the topic is not new. The cascading effect is rather still a low in the news value. Yep.
So perfect.
So those are important elements to consider when I talked a lot about manufacturing. You also have distribution, so on the downstream side. In the US, and I think just to comment on that later, move to Europe.
Patrick. Oh, he's gone. Really apologies for that. The technology was getting in the way there, and I think Patrick was cutting it out as he was trying to talk. So I know you highlighted that in the question, so thank you for that. It's one of those things, and you're never quite sure whether it's you or them, and whether or not you're correct as well, but clearly Patrick's having an issue there. So we'll bring you back in as soon as we can. He was making some brilliant points about the importance of the strategy and the direction that people need to take to really think seriously about their manufacturing base and the distribution base, logistics base, and the sort of aspects that they need to take into account. So while we're waiting for Patrick to come back, I'd also like to bring Agnes and Justin Golson in to join the discussion, because I think I'd like to broaden this out now into having this sort of a mix of people to join us. So if Agnes could join us, and also Justin. Agnes is the Global Planning Director at Avon. And I know she's going to bring some of her insights into how to go about sort of strategic planning direction that needs to go on in that area. So if Agnes could, that'd be great. And Justin Golson is the assistant professor at Penn State University in the US, and delighted that the two of them could join us as well. So I'm going to, if I may, Patrick, and get them a chance to sort of make some comment. But Mr. Justin, I mean, maybe it'd be good to get your take, and maybe just come to you first, because Patrick made some great points there about European manufacturing and also some of the challenges in the US, and I know it's been part of the area that in terms of how this sort of strategic investment that a company is making is going to take forward. I'm interested in your view on this, just in terms of what your Agnes, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. So I do hope you can hear me. Can you hear me, Duncan? Just do a kind of quick check here. Yep.
We've clearly got a problem with the connections on the platform here.
So I agree with a number of those points.
Everyone who
we can hear you, Justin.
There's to see.
Yeah, yes.
Hope.
I'm unmuted, so the only thing is very
hard to hear. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. It's obviously a problem with the platform, so apologies to everyone on that. I'm hoping the guys behind the scenes are trying to beaver away to get some things resolved. So, Justin, I was going to try to come to you to give.
I think we lost Justin, Duncan. So perhaps you can put something else
on.
I'm back. I just try to refresh, just trying to see if I can fix the audio. I think we're good now.
Duncan.
Organizations having and looking at decentralizing the distribution of manufacturing. What's your view? And then
Patrick, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I can hear clearly now. I can hear great now.
So I think Duncan was asking the question on giving a US perspective on what I just presented, Justin.
Yeah, so from a US perspective, we are seeing the same thing. I think that there is a lot to learn from a global perspective in terms, like after the pandemic, with the shortage, with the Suez Canal debacle, as I put it, in that we're all experiencing supply chain disruptions. We're all experiencing leverage technology in order to decentralize supply chains. Right now, in the U.S., we're seeing more organizations that want to be within an arm's reach of their business partners. Right, they want to be able to increase the collaboration and increase the visibility among their supply chains. Right now, on the other side of that, we have situations where we have to diversify, right, our particular supply chains. And I think that technology will enable that. And I think that the pandemic has actually accelerated technology. So the automation that you referred to, we've seen that with organizations like Amazon. Amazon was almost forced to automate in some areas, right, in the US. And I think that a lot of manufacturers and distributors seen that, and I get a lot of questions in terms of that here in the US. So I think that technology is going to have a significant impact and in the decentralization, as I would say. And we're hearing a lot of things about, the buzzword, the metaverse, right? Now, NVIDIA is actually creating the Omniverse. And you're going to see things such as digital twins that's going to enter into the manufacturing and supply chain spaces. And I think that's going to increase the collaboration among business partners from a global perspective.
So I think Justin, just to build on that, I mean, you're saying there there's a definite trend towards having
any questions on that. Can y'all still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
I was trying to say there, Justin, is there's a definite
Duncan,
trend
there?
For you to move in local manufacturing in the US. I mean, Agnes, from your perspective, in your role within Avon, and what you're looking to say, what would your view, Agnes, be on this?
So also in addition to that, don't need to keep going. in addition to that, we're actually experiencing the Great Resignation. With the U.S. printing a lot of money. They turn on a money printer in the U.S. and it's people will actually make more money sitting at home watching Netflix than actually collecting unemployment. So we're actually having a big problem with that, and that's significantly impacting manufacturers and distributors as well. So organizations have to look to automation, to your point, right, in order to counter that. So I think that you also have that to consider whenever you're thinking about decentralizing supply chains, because we have a lot of labor shortage. And that's one thing that is kind of forcing organizations in the U.S. to look overseas.
Yeah, and it's a topic we've covered previously on Supply Chain Talk about that sort of shortage of key skills and key labours. And I think Patrick made the same point about automation has had to be part of this future strategy that organizations need to look at. Agnes, I'm going to try and bring you in finally on this. I've tried about 4 times. Hopefully we can hear you and you can hear us. So
do you have anything to add?
No, Justin, please let me talk to Agnes.
Agnes. No worries. Kind of typical technological issues. I think we all struggle with hearing each other. So I think what I've heard you gentlemen talk about a lot was what is happening with inshoring, reshoring, nearshoring. is a reaction to risk management and building resilience and strengthening predictability. What I would like to point your attention to is that there is another aspect to it. And if you look at, I think it was McKinsey's analysis, that actually it was the last 10 years that businesses are building the regionalization. So the globalization happened before the last 10 years. The balancing of supply chains was already started. And the perspective that I would like to bring to the table is actually the responsiveness, so the positive, not reactive, but proactive. And this is where businesses such as us, we're already looking at it before COVID, is the responsiveness. So we observe that our consumers' trends are changing very fast. We're also observing that there is a need of localization of product, personalization, particularly we're in the beauty industry. So it is about being here and now and following or creating trends. If you want to be responsive, then long lead times and massive safety stocks is not necessarily something that is helpful. So that is one positive aspect. Another aspect that companies are looking for as a reason for nearshoring is actually protection of patents and technologies. Again, I think, Patrick, you mentioned that it's not black or white. Not everybody goes into one solution or everybody goes to another. We're not throwing baby with the bathwater. But in either high margin businesses or in businesses where you want to protect your licenses, your patents, this is another example where you would like to locate yourself somewhere where you have better control over the technology as well as quality. And then finally, two more comments actually. One is about people. So we keep, you gentlemen mentioned labor, talent pool, and costs of labor. I would like to point your attention to actually communication. So nearshoring, when you want to think about, particularly when you have your suppliers where you collaborate a lot, it does make a difference whether you're able to pop in once in a while, to even in COVID times, to have face-to-face workshop to design a new solution. Zoom is amazing, and we've lived with Zoom and whatever platforms with small hiccups for the last 2 years. But there are benefits of being able to be close, of being in the same time zone, being in the same cultural zone, to actually improve communication. So Justin mentioned digital twins. So this is something that, for instance, Avon is implementing right now in integrated planning platform. But that is only as good as execution. Platform by itself, as we all know, is not going to move the needle. Is the people that can use the platform. And that here communication is extremely important, and nearshoring helps with that. And then very final point, I think, Patrick, you mentioned sustainability, which is a very big topic for Avon or Natura, which is our mother company. It's profit, people, and planet. But Natura and The Body Shop, our sister company, and Avon right now is aspiring to become a B Corp. So it's not only sustainability, but it's also human rights protection. And here again, nearshoring and locating a factory in Lithuania gives you better controls and better protection to the people you're impacting and your wider stakeholders. I hope it makes sense.
That's really good, Agnes. Thank you, and I'm glad we finally heard from you. That was great.
Yeah, that does, and I commend you all for registering to be a B Corp, because that's one thing that's very important to me from a sustainability perspective. I'm actually on the graduate advisory board at Georgetown University, and I created a class, corporate social responsibility class, and in getting the graduate students' feedback, whenever you say corporate social responsibility, they feel that it's the responsibility of the Fortune 500 companies. to make things right, right? So I always say that I want to take the corporate out of corporate social responsibility because it's everyone's responsibility, right? All the way down to the warehouse worker, right? And you know, one thing, and again, this is just from a professor's perspective, but one thing that, you know, a lot of graduate students ask is, you know, how do we make a difference if we're just managers in an organization and the CEOs don't even want to listen to us, right? There was one individual at one organization. He said, I was explaining what we talked about in class, and the CEO said, I don't care about the polar bears. Right. So there's a lot of misconceptions in the industry that, you know, sustainability and social responsibility only has to do with, you know, with environmental concerns. That's a very important part. But my focus is on the societal aspect, because without the societal aspect and focus on the society, we can't actually address the climate change. It's going to take the people from a social responsibility perspective to address the climate change, in my opinion. Right? Again, that's my fault.
Bringing that topic back to the talent pool is this is how we're attracting young people, is because we are a company that has that has underlying values that are in accordance with those young people. And if we understand those values in the same way, and, you know, protecting Amazon forests and, you know, sponsoring Water Bear and all those things, then this is something that actually attracts young people, and this is what helping us in the fight for limited resources. And Justin, you mentioned that in the US, you know, the shift of whether people want to work, how much they want to work for. It's also understanding who they want to work for. It's no longer as simple as, whoever pays me more. It's also, can I stand behind the organization that I'm working for? So again, bringing it back to the conversation of nearshoring or inshoring, if you work for a company that is destroying environment or violating human rights, or is not protecting human rights in the way they're sourcing their raw materials, this is where your pool of resources dramatically reduces.
Yeah, I think that's why also, Agnes, if you look into, you know, I've been in the footprint strategy space for more than 20 years, is that, you know, the last 5 years, the whole, you know, sustainability and everything that goes with corporate sustainability, I will take out the corporate piece here, Justin, but, you know, the emphasis and the purpose, and, you know, that is really, you know, on top of everybody's minds. It's not about the lowest landed cost. It's about building the capability in the supply chain and also in the organizations to, you know, really to kind of help the business flourish in the market, but there's also the purpose element that goes with that. So I would say, you know, a lot of companies, even also the mid-sized companies or companies that might be younger, or even the bigger corporates, you know, there's not like just holistic or just some words in a nice annual report, but, you know, where in the past companies in the US were perhaps a little bit following the international companies. I really see a huge pick on when companies are looking at global footprints to really kind of capture the impact of sustainability, global, you know, citizenship, et cetera, et cetera. So really kind of try to kind of put that in perspective. But that also means that if you think about a company and you need to look at your footprint, you know, you have some homework to do in terms of how do you make the right trade-off between landed costs, how do you deal with service, how do you deal with risks and disruption, how do you really kind of factor in, you know, the CSR element there.
Yeah, and I think that probably,
yeah,
Patrick,
and you make an excellent point. And that was one thing I wanted to touch on with Agnes, in that we're doing a lot of research on the quadruple bottom line. And the quadruple bottom line includes exactly what you talked about, Patrick, with purpose, right? It's the 4 Ps: people, planet, profit, and purpose, right? And so I just did a peer-reviewed academic journal article on the metaverse. So this one organization called Big Country, they're in the Polkadot ecosystem, the Polkadot blockchain ecosystem. But and the premise of that, although it's blockchain, the premise of that is a quadruple bottom line, and creating what we refer to as a digital Leviathan. So if you refer to Hobbes, the Leviathan, I think it was written in the 1800s, 1700s, something like that, where it's talking about governments and nation states and things like that in terms of, you know, governments and nations and governments are actually, controlling power, but we're seeing a shift going back to what you referred to, Agnes, in that, the people are going to be very important. And we're seeing that shift now. And we're seeing that in certain industries where we're creating, things like it's called decentralized autonomous organizations. So the decentralized autonomous organizations are organizations that's ran and governed by the people. We're seeing a huge, massive shift, and those younger individuals, they're looking for organizations like that, where there are no hierarchies, right? And they're creating what we refer to as infinite machines. Organizations ran by the people, organizations governed by the people. Now, is that applicable to every single industry? No, right? But technology industries, you're going to begin to see that. And I think that, again, we're very early on. I'm very curious to see if this is applicable within the supply chain industry as well. Because just think about it. If you had a let me see here, a consortium, if you will, ran by a number of different individuals, like startups, for example, right? How would that look in terms of collaboration? How would that look in terms of communication? How would that look in terms of ethics and morals and respect for people, right? So I think that that's something that's very. Are we going to see that this year in the supply chain industry? Probably not. But in the future, I don't know. It's one thing that's very interesting. I think about things like that all the time.
Yeah, that's really good, Justin. I just want to try and bring us back, if we can, to
there are a number of questions here. So if we look at,
Justin, just bear with me if you can. Thank you. So what I'd like to do is bring us back, if I can, to some of the questions that are coming through, because I think they do relate to some of the topics that we wanted to really get on and talk about. So let's take, if we can, a couple of those. Because I think there was general consensus amongst you all that actually there's a real positive side of nearshoring and onshoring of manufacturing, but there's quite a big strategic decision to be made about how to do it, taking into account labor, tax, elements associated with that. And I think one of the questions here was really sort of directed at how do you structure that decision making? How do you really weigh up all the factors that you need to take into account to as a company to decide on what the right strategy is and which country it is to take forward as well? Yes, Justin, we're here. So Agnes and Patrick, hopefully you heard the question there. So what's your take on that in terms of that? Well, maybe Patrick, I'll start with you. That's strategic decision making that people need to be taking.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, because one part of the journey is doing your homework as companies, to understand, like, hey, where's the sweet spot and is this the right avenue? But it's also trying to kind of put things beyond the tummy feeling, right? So how can you articulate and provide the value on where does it make sense? And always make the analogy to the insurance policy. Is this because it provide benefits, or are you mitigating any risk? So I would say the easy part with a lot of calculations, of course.
You heard Duncan?
Yeah, we hear you, Justin. So the easy part is in terms of doing the mathematics, right? And there it's really about, also trying to map out things you don't know. So given today's disruption, it's not so easy anymore to say, let's take a future forecast and we run our numbers, because there's a lot of dependence.
Agnes, do you hear me?
That basically interlink with each other. So there's some scenario planning, I would say, is really key.
They said that Duncan was going to present. I'm not hearing Duncan. Are you hearing Duncan, Agnes?
Yes, I think Patrick was trying to say something. I don't know whether you can hear.
So there's a lot of analysis in terms of the landed cost. That's one side of the coin. But if you look at where I think companies are making step-ins and doing much more analysis on how do you quantify the risks, right? So because we don't know what we don't know, right? So how do you make sure that if you talk about labor risk, if you talk about governmental risk, if you talk about IP rights, if you talk about unreliability, or what Agnes was talking about, responsiveness, how do we value that for part of the business? Whereas if you have business that might be a low cost where you want to have an efficient supply chain, well, okay, then nearshoring is not the right answer, right? So this is not like a one size fits all for everybody. So you really need to understand, what are the elements that you want to bring forward, and you need to assess those risks. You need to look into the conditions there about, hey, what does it bring to the customer? We haven't even spoke that much about the ecosystem management. So what does that mean if you want to do this, and how does it tie you in product innovation? So really kind of making sure that you do proper evaluation from a landed cost, you do proper evaluation on all of the qualitative variables, including, the stuff that we talked about on purpose and CSR in terms of human rights and the availability, and think about elements like power outage or even geopolitical risks, if you were close to the Central Eastern European border or even in Asia. So you really kind of need to address those factors and have an objective conversation in terms of doing the homework and really saying, okay, but is the needle going to move, and why should the needle move, and under which condition is the needle going to move? Because it might well be that there is no play or business case today, but it might be in the next few years. So what is that understanding? And again, we all work with large corporations, and sometimes they have a history that might be a little bit more shorter because of the quarter results. So it is also linked to the corporate culture of the organization to understand, is this something we are planning to do? Because if you do it, it's not something for tomorrow, right? This is something for the long run. So, and flipping back is not the easy part to do. So that's how we within BCI also help clients in that process.
Yeah, and I think, Patrick, that's a really important point about that, the information that you need, because there's so many challenging areas here, aren't there? And you've highlighted already there a number of those factors that you need the insights, you need the longer term view. I think Paul Warner's question was also about he was asking about political barriers, like Brexit that came along, consumed us all for years in terms of what was going to happen, but other trade deals that come through, because they will also impact that decision making, and you need those insights. And I think the problem we've got as procurement and supply chain experts is where do we go to get the information and data? And as you said, people like BCI Global and others provide some of that context. But I mean, Agnes, from your perspective, I mean, how do you start to really help someone like Avon to take that longer term perspective and view? Because you were talking there about agility that you needed as well, and the need to be able to do things, respond to consumers. So that's another factor that's in there as well, isn't it?
So first of all, I just wanted to say that everything that Patrick said is correct. It's not one size fits all, and even for one company, it's not one supply chain for everything. Having multiple categories, having multiple geographies where we sell, it's not one solution for everything. And also, kind of starting from where Patrick started, because this is, and I'm sorry if this is obvious for everybody, but it is balancing risks with return on investment. And I know, Patrick, you mentioned cost, but it's not only cost. So talking about responsiveness, it's the incremental sales that we could get if we were able to react faster. And quite a few businesses are able to actually quantify this. So talking to FMCGs, if you collaborate with large grocers and they come to you because your competitor fell over and can't deliver promotion, and either you can because you have free capacity in your factory in the next market, or you need to wait 6 months until something kind of comes on the boat from China. So that is opportunity revenue that you can quantify. Most of the companies actually can quantify that. And that's the responsiveness, measurement of responsiveness you want to talk about. There is also service. And different companies measure service level differently. But if you observe the positive and negative outliers, not only the MAPE measurement, but if you go into the specifics of outliers, then this is where you can quantify what is the actually potentially lost revenue that you could have gotten if you were able to produce faster or bring it faster to another market. So what I would like to kind of slightly reshape this answer. So it's not costs, is return on investment. And interestingly enough on this one, what I would say is it's the consideration of reshuffling of the whole P&L, because it's cash, because of its inventory and its margin and its revenue opportunities. So the costs coming into margin is the supply chain costs, as well as warehousing costs and write-offs that you have for the stock that you over forecasted. So all those, it's complete reset of a P&L. So here, there is a lot of potential calculation that you need to go into to bring the real value, to start having conversation on that side of the story. On the risk side of the story, it's I guess every company has different risk management approach and different way of assessing what are the levels of risk. What the one thing that I haven't heard is actually the risk of bureaucracy or speed of establishing new manufacturing or even warehousing location within Europe. So people used to coming to China and saying from one day to another, sorry,
Karen,
I'm not sure whether you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay, I've just got a message from Daniel that he's had to refresh you as well. This
Yeah.
It's just one of those days. So Patrick, I think back to maybe coming on to some of the points.
Sometimes I can echo a little bit here.
Okay, sorry, I think I'm back. So what I was.
Oh, we lost her. I think, one of the elements he was making is a key one. It's great to have a supply chain, but if you don't have inventory, but you have sales, you get into the issue of backlog, but that's really hurting the P&L. So that will definitely get senior leadership attention. And you also see this in terms of the whole, play and how you evaluate things. You see this also in fulfillment, right? So we had in the old days, when you talk about warehouse automation, is to make it very practical for the audience. You saw people doing the ROIs and the business cases, and it never turned out profitable. Well, guess what? If you have a facility in Milton Keynes, but there's no workers to kind of do
the... It's very unlucky session, I must admit.
I think we need to invite you all back, Agnes, to do another one of these, and let's hope that it's all very stable on that side.
So let me finish. Have you heard what I was saying about P&L?
Yes.
Yes, and then have you heard what I was saying about speed of setting up new business in Europe?
Yeah, we were just getting to that point about the speed of a manufacturing facility in China, and then the bigger challenge in Europe of planning and construction, and then finding the labor. I think Patrick was just making a point there that you can build the factory, but if you then can't get the labor, which I think was interesting when we started this discussion around Lithuania, there's certain parts of Europe where the labor's available, but there's other parts where it isn't. So you can have a great factory, but not be able to get the labor and all the talent you need to be able to run that factory effectively.
Or warehousing locations, right? So as there was a moment where everybody located their DCs in Western Czechia. Yeah. So, and right now you don't have resources there anymore. So you need to think also from their perspective of how much drainage in resource pool we already created by locating manufacturing and distribution in certain regions.
Yeah. So Patrick, you were halfway through it again, and we lost you again. So, but I think we picked up the gist of the decision making here. And I just said to Agnes, we have to do this again with a stable platform and actually build this conversation further forward, because it's not been the most smooth running session we've ever run in here. But Patrick, I mean, I'll maybe just come to you to sort of, because of the platform unstable, I think, let's just maybe a few final thoughts from you that you want to sort of leave to people who are watching this in terms of the way about going this decision making and making sure that people really do take all those aspects, the 4 Ds I think you talked it into account when you're moving forward.
I think we're really on a crossroad here, right? So either you manage and you stick with global complex supply chains, but then it's like driving a car. You need to have a driver's license to drive the car, right? So that you're going to drive, a machine, and how to make sure that you operate the machine and doesn't matter. So if you're going to choose for long, complex supply chains, then you need to manage them in a much more better way than we ever had been doing before. So that is a key component. So that's okay to do, but as long as the decision is deliberate. And I think if you say, there's a need to kind of potentially consider, potential decentralization, then people need to do the homework. And the homework could well be is like, hey, let's do the homework in terms of, when is this applicable for our business, and what are the benefits, either in the intangibles or tangibles, and when to do it or not to do it. But people need to do the homework, because senior management will be asking at board level in terms of what is our risk profile, or what is exposure, because we don't have the products because they're stuck on the ocean. So senior leaders and supply chain professionals will need to do the homework together with their peers to kind of bring the ideas forward on what are the different models and operating models that are out there, and when to apply it. And that's really where it's about doing your homework in terms of your financial analysis from a total landed cost. So not looking only at the lowest labor cost that people have been doing in the past, but really taking all of the different elements and putting a objective review to the qualitative and risk elements. And that's really by looking at various sources to really kind of, as we call it within BCI, we talk about different pieces of the jigsaw that fit, that tie in together, and to have an educated conversation with leadership on, where do we want to be when we grow up, and what kind of choices are we making, so that if your CEO calls and there's issues in your supply chain, and it's because of the bad design, well, okay, then that's not a quick fix, right? So it's really about, this gets into the core of the DNA of who we are in a company. And I think if you look into the positive here is that, supply chain professionals can make an impact, right? If you look into the importance and how the importance bar has been risen by many companies and the awareness, this is also a very big positive. So we should also take that opportunity to drive things forward with senior leaders to say, supply chain is not about costs. It's about capability. It's about making sure that you can, support the company's growth or the company's ambitions, and trying to develop that accordingly. So I think that's also a big plus in that regards. But I think we have homework to do. I think we all have to be fair. Like, hey, we've been, very, very effective and very efficient by having the whole globalization and the low ocean costs. So that was in the past, but that's not going to go back. So we need to adapt. We need to change. We need to be ready for, the aftermath of COVID or the new morale, and that's going to be, with quite some vulnerabilities and disruptions going forward.
Yeah, and I think that step up and start to take some leadership of the challenges and reshaping supply chains is a theme that's coming through. And I agree with you. I mean, lots of us have been very reactive to the situation and sort of not really focusing on the bigger picture. And I think the opportunity the supply chain people have now is to be focusing on the bigger picture and really reshape these supply chains. And I think, Agnes, coming to you for a final comment on there, that's certainly where I think you were coming from, is that that strategic planning perspective and really taking a part of that is a role that maybe wasn't open to supply chain people in the past, but maybe is now because of such a dramatic shift that's going on across all of industry.
Absolutely. So my closing thought was to absolutely, as a supply chain expert, to start from business strategy. Everything else, what we decide, how we're going to structure our execution, whether it's nearshoring or offshoring or owning our assets, manufacturing and distribution, this all needs to start with what is the business strategy. And never, ever is it a purely cost-based funnel vision about supply chain solution. It needs to be a business solution, because it does impact commercial as well as finance, not only supply chain. Supply chain is not only the remit of operations right now. It's part of the business.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really good point, and thank you for that. We'll wrap this up for now. Both Patrick and Agnes, really appreciate your time and your perseverance through the technical issues that we've had here. And we seem to, I know we did start off with sort of problems with our US guest Justin as well, but he seems to have disappeared totally. So, but I'll pass my thanks on to Justin as well for his inputs as well. I'd also like to thank the people who are joining us. Quite a few comments on chat good and bad about what's going through, but some quite funny ones on there as well. Some really good questions. Particularly the one from John Richards, I think, was the one that really sparked this discussion around the broader strategy piece. So when I'm giving out SupplyChainTalk books, I think I'll probably give it this week to John for his recommendation that he added in, which helps us all. So thank you for that, which we know is a big focus area for everyone globally at the moment, and the approach that you need to take to tackle. Want to see you again on the next episode of